Photoshop has different layer types that have different properties. In this lecture, we'll cover all of them. The first layer type is the shape layer. This is the red rectangle on the screen, and we can recognize it's a shape layer by looking at its thumbnail. I'll zoom in just so you can see it better. Keep in mind that although you may be tempted to increase your thumbnail size like so, I advise you to keep them at this small size. You'll get used to it, I promise. Okay, that's the symbol for a shape layer, and that means this is a vector. So no matter how big we make it, it'll be nice and smooth. It doesn't get pixelated. Let me add a layer style so you can see it even better. I'll go with a gradient overlay. Okay, now that we have it applied, let's enlarge it. As you can see, it still looks crisp. We have no fuzzy or blurry edges. Whenever possible, use shape layers because they offer more flexibility size-wise. Next, we'll focus on what Photoshop uses most, raster layers. As an example, we have this carrot on our canvas. Note that the graphic in itself doesn't matter. The carrot is not special in any way. You could use literally any other image. But how do you know it's a raster layer? Well, you look in the Layers panel and you'll see its thumbnail is clean. It doesn't have any icon inside. It's just a small image of a carrot and that's it. What does this imply? A few things. First, it's editable, meaning that you can take a brush and paint over it. Or you can get the eraser and remove parts of it. You can basically do just about anything with it by using the tools and options in Photoshop. The downside, if you try to enlarge it, it gets pixelated really fast. Jagged edges, blurry lines, you name it. So it accepts all changes, but it loses quality if you try to enlarge it, even if it's just a bit. This is what Photoshop uses the most, and you should really get familiar with the concept of a rasterized layer. Just about all layer types can be transformed into it, as you're about to see. For example, the shape layer we previously saw. If I select the brush tool and try to paint over it, you'll see my cursor shows a denied symbol. If I click to paint, Photoshop will let me know that I can't do that unless I rasterize it. So I'll lose my vector abilities if I do that, but it's necessary if I want full editing capabilities. If I click OK, you'll see the thumbnail of the layer has now changed, and it looks like the carrot. Simple, no other icon inside it. Let me undo with Ctrl-Z so we can move on. I know you may be thinking, hey, this doesn't make sense. Why don't they make a shape layer that's fully editable but also keeps its vector properties? It's simple. Each layer is specialized for a special task, and you combine them to achieve your perfect result. This is not a one-size-fits-all because the program would lose flexibility. The next layer type is a text layer. This can also be resized to any dimension without losing quality. To make any changes to its appearance, we'll use the Character panel. You can open it by going to Window, Character. And from now on it will appear to the left of your Layers panel. Click the A icon if you want to collapse it, and repeat to expand it. In this panel, you can change just about anything. Font family, weight, size, color, you name it, it's all here. What you can't do is edit it like we did for the carrot layer. For that, you have to rasterize like it was the case with the rectangle. The thing is this, text layers should always remain live. That simply means editable. If you rasterize them, you will no longer be able to edit the content. Right now it's live, and we can see that by looking at our Layers panel. We can see this icon. If we double-click its thumbnail, we'll get all the letters selected. Let me press the Escape key and show you the other way of selecting it. You press T for the Type tool, and you go near your layer on the canvas. Notice the cursor initially has a dotted border around it, but as I go near the text, that disappears. What's the difference? Well, if you see the border, that means you'll create a new text layer. Check the Layers panel for confirmation. Yep, here it is. But if you click inside the initial text layer, you can now edit it. Once you're done, you need to press the numerical Enter key or this check mark at the top. The choice is yours, but I prefer using the Enter key. Again, I'm talking about the numerical one. If you use the regular Enter key, you'll add another line to your text layer and you probably don't want to do that. Right, so text layers should remain editable in just about every circumstance. But let's say you want to rasterize them for a specific effect. That's easy. You right-click it in the Layers panel and select Rasterize Type. As you can see, the thumbnail has changed. And if you try to adjust the text, you won't be able to do it. What you can do is paint over it with a brush, delete it with the eraser, and so on. It really depends what you want to do. We have just a little bit more to go. Smart objects are represented by this watch graphic, and you may be immediately wondering, hey, that looks similar to the carrot. Yep, that's the case, but that doesn't mean they share the same type. They're made by the same designer and have the same style, but if you check your Layers panel, you'll see this has a different thumbnail. This icon shows you it's a smart object. So what's the deal with them? Well, smart objects are special layers that hold onto their information. Like I said, Photoshop works with pixels. The carrot has about, say, 15,000 pixels, right? If I make it half that size with the help of Ctrl-T, now it will have only about 7,500 pixels. The rest of them got thrown away. We can't get them back. If we try to enlarge it back to its original size, you can see it now looks blurry because Photoshop had to invent 7,500 of those pixels that were no longer there. That's how the program deals with raster layers. On the other side, a smart object tells Photoshop you need that information later down the road. So if we shrink the clock at 50% and then we get it back to 100%, you'll see it looks fine. That's because Photoshop was told to keep that information. So smart objects sound amazing, right? Actually, they're more than that. Any layer can be transformed into a smart object, and any smart object can be rasterized. Follow me on this. If we right-click the raster layer in the Layers panel, we have the option to convert it to a smart object. You can see that here. Now check the thumbnail, and you'll see it's a smart object. Great. But does that mean Photoshop found those 7,500 pixels it threw away previously? Of course not. The image is still blurry. But it's now been instructed to keep the pixels it currently has. So if I now shrink it all the way down to 10%, then resize it back to 100%, you'll see it looks the same as before. So again, any layer can be transformed into a smart object, and that means Photoshop will keep all those pixels it currently has in its memory. Furthermore, smart objects have a special attention from Photoshop's algorithms, so this means that when you enlarge such a layer, you'll get a better result than when you enlarge a raster layer. So you might be asking yourself this: if smart objects are more flexible because they keep their information, and if they enlarge better due to Photoshop's new fancy engine, then why would we ever work with raster layers? And that's simple. Smart objects are not directly editable. So there's always a catch. Not because Adobe wants to mess with you, but because everything has its own goal. There's a lot more to talk about smart objects because they have a lot of power, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, as we'll maybe come back to that bit later on. The last layer type I want to talk about are adjustment layers. Remember that yin-yang symbol? That's created them, and they look like these last two layers. If you click the icon at the bottom, you'll see a long list of them, and each one has its own thumbnail. If you double-click it, you'll have all sorts of options regarding it. With these layers, you don't see anything solid on the canvas. They're mostly for, guess what? Adjustments. So these can be used to brighten up a specific color or the entire canvas. You can drop the saturation, you can make the whole image black and white, and so on. So while the other layer types create a tangible element, if you will, these adjustment layers mostly modify what you already have on the canvas. Of course, there are one or two exceptions, and that's why I included the color fill adjustment layer, which acts as our background. If I double-click its thumbnail, I can quickly change the color of my canvas. Right, so these are the main layer types you need to know. Shape layers, which are vectors and can be resized without losing quality. Raster layers, which are editable 100% but can't be enlarged optimally. Text layers, which are straightforward and can be adjusted through the character panel. Smart objects, which keep the pixel information and resize much better than raster layers, but they're not editable directly. Adjustment layers that are used to modify what you already have on the canvas. Attached to the course, you have a PSD file which contains several layers that are unnamed. Please take the time to rename them according to the file type they belong to. So when you recognize a layer, double-click its name and change it to whatever format it is, shape layer, raster, etc. Just in case you want to see the solution, you can check out the end of the course for the answer.